glad to hear you're not going to be hearing much from me, because we've got a brilliant panel for a reason, because they are the experts in this field. I'm merely going to be trying to make sure they ask the right questions at the right times, reading the room, looking around people to see if they're raising their hand or wanting to say something, because I've spoken to the group and we've agreed that we really want to be as interactive as possible. So please, please don't suffer in silence. If there's something you want to ask or get across, holler. And if I haven't seen you, whatever, keep on persevering and I'll make sure I try and get to that. We do have some questions already that I will be posing. We really want to try and get through those. But as I say, this is an open forum, and please feel welcome to speak as you see fit. So firstly, thank you, Naren and Nikki from MEFA for allowing us to host this MEFA Matters event. We're really, really pleased to do it. And it's on a topic that's really, really important to us. It's something that as an organisation and for a lot of our individuals have been going through from a very personal perspective. And I think it'd be fair to say over the last 2 or 3 years, we've all had our moments from a mental wellbeing perspective. So the fact that we're going to be talking about mental wellbeing and how that particularly affects certain audiences is something that I think is really powerful, and it might create some emotion. So open forum, don't feel it's embarrassing to ask any questions, come at us as you see fit. So we have a brilliant panel, and I'm going to read a little bit about who they are because I don't want to get any of it wrong. And as you can see, if I could speak it freely, it kind of goes off piste a bit. So firstly, I'm delighted to say that we have Jaspreet, and it's Kaur is the correct pronunciation. Now, Jaspreet is a spoken word poet, author and educator, award-winning British South Asian spoken word artist and writer from East London. She taught history, sociology and politics in secondary schools across London with an academic background in both history and gender studies and a passion for social justice. Jaspreet has been committed to using her writing and spoken word to tackle gender discrimination, mental health issues, and stigma, the post-colonial immigrant experience, and taboo issues within the South Asian community. So you've been talking about quite a lot. Her TEDx London talk, How Poetry Saved My Life, to an audience of 1,200 people, explored how the power of words gave her the confidence to overcome her own mental health struggles. Regular appearances on the BBC One Sunday Morning live show and Radio 4, and she's also featured in Stylist magazine and The Metro. She's author of a #1 Amazon bestseller, Brown Girl Like Me, one of the first books to speak directly to the experience of South Asian women in Britain since 1978, and which delves into some of the most complex conversation British women are tackling today. Boy, there's a lot there, isn't there? And she's also expecting a child, so she's got a lot going on. So thank you for being here. It's really, we really love having you here.
Thank you so much.
We also have Karen Charles over here, who is a personal development coach and senior support advisor for NABS. And for those of you who aren't familiar with what NABS is, I'm going to let Karen explain that shortly. She's led client services and operations teams across media owners and an agency. And Karen has had intimate first-hand experience with the mental health impact of navigating an environment where you are only one of a few. Karen's experience has let her become a coach, a mentor, and she leverages her lived experience to support Black and brown women to navigate existing in a culturally diverse environments with an emphasis on well-being and self-care. The aim is to help them move from surviving to thriving, which I think is a really nice phrase. As a part-time senior support advisor on NAB's advice line, Karen plays a crucial part in supporting the well-being of those in the industry with a range of support services and a listening ear. Now, I have to just explain, for a heavily dyslexic person reading all this content, its content is just challenging. So please bear with me. And next to Lex, that rhymes. So Lex Lovell, NLP master practitioner, workplace wellbeing trainer, MHFA instructor, which is a mental health first aider. We've met you before because you've done a lot of work with our organisation, so you're a friend, and all friends, I hasten to add, but someone we've worked with before. And yeah, you've delivered some brilliant training for our team. So Lex is an NLP master practitioner and works alongside people on a one-to-one basis, helping them overcome any areas in their life that they are struggling with or any unhelpful behaviours that they would like to change. Lex is also a mental health first aid instructor with an in-depth knowledge of mental health issues and illnesses, and delivers training within companies to help people gain a better understanding of mental health. Knowledge and empathy of the topic enables Lex to build a good rapport and trust with people, which greatly helps them achieve a better understanding of mental health and illness, which then helps reduce stigma and discrimination and opens up the conversation and creates a positive outcome. Thank you, Lex.
Well, you're welcome.
Last but not least, Catherine Fowler, who is for those of you from Media Lab, familiar to us all. She is head of HR at Media Lab. I shouldn't really need to read this, but I'm going to because it's better than what I could say. So Catherine has worked tirelessly to ensure that mental well-being and diversity and inclusivity are top of the agenda at Media Lab, and it's been a real learning journey for her and for us, and it's been something I've been very privileged to be part of. Under her guidance, 1 in 10 of all of the Media Lab employees are now trained in mental health first aid by Lex. We've been recognised by Mind for the work that we do in supporting our team by achieving gold in their workplace wellbeing index. And she's also very much leaned into the Mind account to understand what it is we can do as an organisation to do greater work. She's also been fundamental in driving our Together We Stand initiative, which was triggered by the awful events surrounding George Floyd a few years ago, where it was an opportunity for everyone to have a safe, open forum to speak as a group, which has created lots of really, really interesting sessions, not dissimilar to this, where people can talk about topics that really matter to them. So Catherine is perfectly positioned to give a valuable perspective from the company's perspective. Right, I'm speaking far too much, but I hopefully have given a really, really good, accurate description of our brilliant panel. So the areas we're going to cover off today, what is the problem and why does it exist? How have recent external factors disproportionately influenced mental health of those from an ethnic minority, or those from ethnic minority groups? And what can we do to address these issues to support our team, colleagues, friends, and everyone, really, ultimately? Right. So, on to the question. NABs. Karen, yes.
Thank you.
Please, tell us about NABs.
So just want to say that obviously what we're going to be talking about today may have people having thoughts, feelings, or maybe triggering for some. So just to flag who and what NABS is. So NABS is a charity that supports the well-being of those in the media and advertising industry. So we have an advice line that anyone can call, whatever is troubling you. It doesn't need to be work-related. We do get that if something is impacting you in other areas of your life, it may also impact your working environment. We offer a range of services. So first and foremost, a listening ear, which is confidential. We also offer therapy, coaching, and various other things. So if anyone's, either during this, afterwards, or sometimes it can take a little while to sort of hit us, please give us a call.
Right. The first question, which I'm going to start with you, Jaspreet, but I'm going to let everyone answer. So in your experience, how does one's heritage, culture, and upbringing influence their mental health? And specifically, if they are from an ethnically diverse heritage?
Oh yeah, this is definitely a good place to start. And I guess it's a lot of what my research has focused on for Brown Girl Like Me, but also my own lived experiences of suffering from anxiety attacks and suffering from depression over the years. It's been something I've struggled with since the age of 13. And it was actually why I first started writing. And that's something I shared in the TED Talk about how, because I was growing up in quite a traditional Punjabi family, at that time we just did not talk about mental health. It was just a topic that did not come up in our household. It's definitely changed now over the years. But this is where, specifically for the South Asian community, there is this double-edged sword of, on the one hand, there's still this ongoing stigma around mental health, not being able to talk about it, not being able to be open about it, a lot of kind of negative connotations about people that do suffer from mental health issues. Over the years, I've heard everything from people being called Bargal, which is known as crazy, and being told that they've got black magic on them or kind of omens on them. And specifically for South Asian women, being told things like, oh, you don't want anyone to know about that because you'll never be able to get married and you'll never be able to find a partner. So all this kind of negative language around suffering from mental health issues. But the reality is, specifically for South Asian women, is that we're twice as likely to suffer from anxiety and depression than our white counterparts. So in our own homes, we're suffering. And then when you leave the home and you go out into the public sphere, there's also a number of issues going on there. And in the book, I was speaking to South Asian girls and women in schools and the workplace later on in life who are still within those institutions finding a lot of difficulties because of this feeling of they couldn't be their truest self when they enter these places, whether that's school, whether it's the workplace. And when they do go to seek help, so they look for kind of formal mental health support, they've often felt that they haven't received perhaps the culturally sensitive mental health support that they need, including myself. When I did finally pluck up the courage to go seek mental health support when I was at uni, one of the first experiences I had with a counsellor at that point was a really negative one. And sadly, that started quite a negative journey when I was seeking for help. And the practitioner I was speaking to, I was telling her about the fact that I was suffering from anxiety and feelings of depression. And her suggestion was a very, I would say, white Western perspective on the issues I was describing. She, in reaction to some of the things I was telling her, advised that if I wanted to live a more free and independent life and a happier life, that I should just leave my family and just leave the home. And I was like, yo, you're totally missing everything I'm trying to describe here, verbal, non-verbal cues of everything that I'm suffering from. And your suggestion is essentially to leave my culture, to leave my identity, to leave a lot of who I am behind and come closer to whiteness or come closer to Western perspectives to feel more accepted. And I think that just made me feel even worse and made me feel even more confused. And that's why I just kept turning to writing and poetry as my only outlet. But over the years, I've then had really positive experiences too. Therapists and counsellors that did have the cultural sensitivity. You could tell they did have the essential training that is needed to have that cultural awareness of different perspectives, whether it's ethnic minority communities, marginalised communities, to know how to cater for them. So that's a lot of the work that I'm trying to do now, emphasising the need for cultural sensitivity in mental health services, but also conveying other forms of therapy, whether it's creative expression, poetry, the arts, how they can also be really beneficial in terms of our mental health. And I did some really great research with the Arts and Wellbeing Foundation a couple of years ago, and we had a cohort of participants who were suffering from anxiety and depression. And over 6 weeks of them writing poetry, using creative expression as an outlet, within 6 weeks, 100% of the participants said they started to feel a lot better, that their anxiety was improving, their depression was improving. So that was just proving to us how the arts and creative expression can be a really useful tool. And it can also save the NHS a lot of money. It can, on average, save around £200,000 a year if we start using these creative outlets to support people's mental health. So that's also something I'm trying to encourage in the South Asian community, as well as leaning into what I call our ancient practices too. Things like mindfulness, meditation, yoga have been a part of South Asian culture for thousands of years. And it's interesting that a lot of these things are now being sold back to us as ways to support our mental health, but they've actually been a part of our identity, a part of our culture for a very long time. So maybe perhaps leaning into those practices. So like I started off by saying, it is a bit of this double-edged sword of, number one, we need to be able to talk about it, especially in our homes, especially amongst our communities, to then find the help that is going to be suitable for us. So it's figuring out that journey.
It's amazing. And you talk about this in your book, but and the talks you've done, but do you feel that the journey you've been on with your family and the people that you've been affected or you're connected to, that the process is working and it's having an impact on broader society? Are you seeing change, or is it a slow where would you say it's at currently? Sorry, I will ask this question to everyone else.
Yeah, it's slow and steady, but I think the change is happening. And it's really great to see it's happening amongst the younger generation who are more vocal about it and are much more open about it. But how do we make sure that this is intergenerational, that it's also our parents, our grandparents who are getting involved in these conversations? Because specifically for ethnic minorities or those from marginalised communities, a lot of this is also intergenerational trauma, which was something I was really interested in researching about, a term that comes up a lot these days. You might see it a lot on social media. What is intergenerational trauma? And some of the first research on it was done back in the 50s and 60s, looking at specifically how for Holocaust survivors, how for even their children and their grandchildren, that trauma was actually still being passed on. and it gets passed on in our DNA code. And unless we take the time to heal and to stop that cycle, it will continue to pass on to our children and our grandchildren. And when I looked at that specifically for the Jewish community, and then also recognised that for the South Asian community, have also gone through significant trauma in the last 50, 60 years, everything from partition to displacement to famine to genocide to mass migration. All those things are probably still trickling through each generation until we take the time to really look after our mental health. And I recognise that for my grandparents' generation and my parents' generation, especially those who were migrating here, they didn't have the time to think about their mental health. They were trying to set a foundation for their families. They had to put food on the table. They had to find a house. They had financial burdens to think about. So they, at first, when I've started these conversations with elders in the community, they would laugh about it. Like, oh, we haven't got time to think about those things. We never had time to think about our mental health. But they are now starting to recognise why it is really important that they support their well-being, as well as encouraging the younger generations to do the same.
I want to come back on that, but I think we should open this up to the rest of the group, because there's so much in what you just said that's really relevant. Who would like to go next?
I'll go next. Thank you for that. I see so many parallels within the Black community, and the stigma and the shame that's attached to it. And the shame is not just the person, it's the shame that you bring on the entire family. You know, you're thought of as being sensitive or too sensitive, you know, suck it up kind of thing, and move forward. And generationally, that's what we've done. That's what we've had to do. And part of that is survival, particularly when you have been taken from, you know, the places that you are indigenous to. So that does get passed down through all of the generations as well. And you're right, it is about removing that stigma and having those conversations. And they are challenging when we occupy a society that culturally we're expected to fit into, but in doing that, it can lose our cultural references, traditions, and things like that. So there is a conflict in many ways of doing that, and that can get in the way of getting, you know, the help that we need, because often we're speaking to people who don't have a frame of reference about our culture and how it works, and can only reference their own culture, which can, you know, add to the trauma as well. And you know, the simple thing of talking and being given space to talk can really help, because until we can have those conversations with our family, with those friends, you know, the people who were there for us, it's just going to continue to be a secret.
I think the frame of reference thing is really an interesting point, and I know Lex is passionate about it because she taught me all about it. But when I did my mental health first aid training with Lex, that was the one thing that I really took away from it. And I think when you're talking to somebody who is coming to you for help around their mental health or any problem, to be honest, your first kind of instinct is to try and solve the problem. And the one thing I learned through, and that's my natural kind of go-to, is, okay, how can I help you? How can I fix it? But that's actually not very helpful, because your solution to that problem isn't necessarily the right one for that individual. And the whole applying that frame of reference to me just totally flipped it, and having the empathy to listen, understand, ask questions, and really understand where they're coming from and what their mindset is, was what really changed the way that I help and approach those conversations. You know, I try not to talk very much, actually, and I just ask more and more questions.
That. Sorry, I was going to challenge. I'm going to challenge that, and I'm not supposed to.
But you know, I just want to, and I think to the point around not understanding the cultural nuances around that is asking, being brave enough for me to ask the question, actually, I don't really understand that. Can you explain it to me? Like, what was that like for you? Because I didn't experience that in my life, and I really want to know more. And until you, as somebody who's working with somebody who is experiencing that, until you have the confidence to actually ask those questions rather than just sort of sit there and nod and then go to your go-to answer, nothing's going to change, because you're never going to really understand what that person's going through, and then therefore you're not going to be able to really help them. So.
Yeah.
I think that connects probably to something you're probably going to want to talk about next. Or would you like to add,
Yeah, I can
add
do
to
that
that?
bit. No, so I was thinking like, that's it, spot on. As you were saying, oh, we don't understand the frame of reference. And I was thinking, that's spot on. But most of us don't sit back to think, what is our own frame of reference? Yet we just kind of program ourselves to however we've been programmed and just go with it. But sometimes we've got to sit back to go, actually, how do I see the world? Because if you think about your thoughts, your feelings, your beliefs, your values, they all come from past experiences. So we are all unique, we're all different. So that's it, when you're having a conversation with someone, it's all about being able to communicate non-judgmentally. And you're not going to be able to do that unless you understand what your window of the world is, to then be able to park that, to then look at that person and go, right, what is going on for you? Try and get me to your window of the world. Let me understand it from your perspective. Because I can't help you at all. Because again, I've got to be able to park me. We're quick enough to be able to go, here, okay, this is how I would do it. This is my opinion. This is how I would fix the problem. But that's not useful for anyone. As you were talking, I was thinking, yeah, as you were saying, that counsellor didn't come from your side of it to kind of understand what was going on for you. So you can't put an opinion on or advice on anything that it's not helping anyone. And that's where we've got to be able to then be able to educate ourselves when we think about, right, what is going on for you? Because just as you said, it's being able to be brave, to sit back, to kind of go, I'm sorry, I don't understand this right now, but please explain to me what it is and how can I help you? That's what it is about.
And then be open-minded enough to not judge, like you said, non-judgmentally, is then, to hear that person's thoughts, and whether or not you believe or agree with them, to think, well, okay, well, that's how they're feeling, whether or not you think that's right or wrong, that is how that person's feeling right now, and really understanding, getting past that is the biggest kind of turning point in terms of really being able to help somebody, I think.
Yeah. I think it's that empathy as well. It's when we're communicating with people, or we want people to open up, because that's essentially what we want to do, like to reduce the stigma, is being able to understand what is going on for people, just be able to talk more about mental health, but we have to understand it ourselves. So then for people to open up and talk, there's all those areas that you think, well, one, empathy. Well, if I go back right from the beginning, we need to open a safe space. Yeah, if people want to talk, they're not going to talk if they don't feel safe to open up and talk. So how do we create that safe environment for someone to open up? If they feel safe, they're going to open up for the trust. The trust has got to be there. And then we have to park that judgment, so there's no judgment involved. And then also empathy. We need all of these things. If we can't empathise with that person, they're not going to open up to us. And even if it's sometimes that we don't understand what's going on for them, that's okay, because we're not there to fix it. It's to be able to sometimes just sit back and go, okay, well, though I don't understand it, but I'm here for you right now. Like, so how can I help you? What do you need right now?
And I think there's a really big difference of feeling empathy versus sympathy.
Yeah, definitely.
And sometimes those two things get mixed up, especially when you are trying to seek help. Yeah. But there's a huge difference. And I think that feeling of somebody being sympathetic towards you and feeling sorry for you isn't what you're looking for. You're looking for somebody to empathise with you, and to understand what it might be like in your shoes. And I think historically, what I was seeing specifically for South Asian women was, because there's a lot of these outdated stereotypes about who South Asian women are, a lot of which I was trying to challenge with the work that I do, was a lot of these connotations about South Asian women being weak, submissive, docile, lacking autonomy, lacking a voice, and a lot of this kind of victimhood storytelling about who South Asian women were. And you think kind of historically, the kind of representation you see of South Asian women, whether that was in TV or in film or in books, was always that kind of outdated, sad stereotype, was that when we did approach people for help, it was always that sympathy coming at us. And those kind of outdated stereotypes you could see were still sitting in their psyche. And that's what we're trying to overcome, so that actually it's empathy that we're needing and people really listening and understanding, and that's what we're needing.
I think that broader empathy point from a societal perspective is, if we can fix that, if people could just be generally more empathetic, I think it would fix a lot of problems in this world, wouldn't it? And the sympathy point is a really big distinction between that. It's really
And I
on
think
point.
a lot of people a lot of people don't realise the difference. A lot of people, like you say, do look at sympathy as, well, I'm helping. But actually what sympathy does is just shut someone down because you're not on the same wavelength of them. But lots of people don't understand the difference between the two.
So that's a perfect segue into the next question, which is then, we've talked about it from a personal perspective, but from how this affects people in the working environment. It feels like that's kind of something that'd be quite a good thing to discuss, unless there's any other questions that are coming from the group. I've said I was going to scour the room and check. I've not been following my duties. Has anyone got any questions they would like to ask or pick up on from what we've been discussing? Excellent. Right. Well, so from a workplace environment, how do we feel this first question that we ask relates, and what can we do to sort of make it a better place? Because everyone here works in our industry, and what can we do to make it a better place?
Yeah, so Lex talked about creating a safe space, right? And sometimes we lose sight of what that means. So I can sit here and announce that this is a safe space. It isn't just because I've said it is, right? A safe space is where people can feel heard, can feel seen, not judged, that there's confidentiality, right, which is really key. We work in organizations, we don't want to hear our business coming out of other people's mouths, at any point. And it's knowing that if they share, they're going to get that support, they're going to be heard, yeah? So it's about creating that safe space. And then when you do that, because we talk about bringing, our true selves, right, to work, that means different things for different people, right? Culturally, who we may be outside of work can be quite different when we're in work, right? Like today, I was like, okay, I'm going back into the corporate environment. I need to wear a dress. I need to do this. And I went, no, you need to be comfortable. So here we are. So it is about that. It is, if people feel safe, they're comfortable to communicate what's happening. They're comfortable to put their hand up, If there's accountability, that makes it even easier to say, look, I have experienced this. This is how I'm feeling about it. How can you help?
Then you like to expand? I think that's bang on. Any other?
Oh, can I just add one more thing? Just talking about sort of the difference in cultures and where sometimes, so what tends to happen, not just in the working environment, but we do spend a lot of time at work, is what is referred to as code switching or masking. So, we'll turn up to work and we'll be one person because we need to assimilate, or we feel we need to fit in, we need to be like everyone else. Because if I'm like everyone else, I will be treated the same as everyone else. It's not always the case. So you have that going on. And then when you're outside of that with your own people, be it your community or your friends or what have you, you will express yourself in, very different ways than you would do in the office. And I remember seeing a thread on social media where a black woman had commented, oh, I forgot to code switch in the meeting and I said this thing, right? And then the back and forth was just hilarious about other black women going, oh my gosh, I hear you, this, that, and then sending memes of, what that feels like. And it was funny because it was so relatable, So, yeah, I'm going to stop there and let someone else speak.
No, that's really interesting. And code switching is actually a new thing that I've learned from Karen. I've learned so much from this panel, but I think that's something that I knew existed, but I didn't know it had a name, which, you learn something new every day, which is why I wanted to be here today. But I think that's so interesting. And I think it just sort of really comes back to, like you say, creating a safe space in a working environment and allowing people to feel like they can talk openly and not just put put the infrastructure in place to make that happen, rather than just sort of expecting people to just turn up and feel, oh, this is all right, I can talk about myself here. You know, you need to communicate that that is a safe space, and doing, you know, mental health first aid training, or having our Together We Stand sessions where we say that's a safe space for you to come and non-judgmentally, you know, share your stories and educate us all on your own life experiences, means that, you know, in that environment, people hopefully feel more open to having those conversations. And even if they don't feel comfortable sharing it, they at least can experience the fact that other people are sharing that, and know that when the time's right, that if they need to, they can as well. But I think the onus is very much on everybody to create that environment, and not just expect the individuals to feel like, right, I've got to be brave to be able to make a move that's out of my comfort zone and talk to somebody, but actually providing a situation that they feel like that's a natural thing to do.
And I think it's also, if it's in your culture, right, ideally you shouldn't have to announce, right? In an ideal world, we shouldn't have to announce it's a safe space, right? If it's in your culture and it's a way of being for everyone, it's a safe space all the time. Everywhere you move, it's a safe space. Yeah.
Yeah, I suppose that's what I was thinking.
Because
It's
it's
gonna
something
be,
we feel,
No, go
rather
on.
than an announcement. If I feel safe, if I feel comfortable, I am more likely to participate and to share how I'm feeling, and share my sorrow, share my joy.
Yeah, that's it. I was just thinking that what we were saying, like, what is a safe space? That's the difference, isn't it? And that's the hard. Sometimes I think moving forward in a workplace is like, yeah, we're creating this safe environment, but what is that? You know, again, it's individual. So it's always got to stop to everyone. Goes, well, what does a safe space mean for you? What does it mean for you? What does it mean for you? To be able to take on board for everyone, to then be able to try and put all of that in a workplace. Because you, like you say, can't just go, come on in, this is a safe space, if you doesn't feel like it.
And that emotional labour shouldn't have to be on that individual to feel
Yeah.
that way. It should be, it was mentioned before, it should be a feeling in that environment, in that culture, in that ethos, that you can feel that exists.
Yeah.
And there's ways to implement that, whether that's policies, whether that's networks, whether that's providing safe spaces, whether that's coming from leadership, from top down. That's the reality of how we create that ethos. But it is really a feeling of when you enter the workplace and you feel, okay, I do feel accepted, and I feel valued, and I feel heard, and I feel included. And the reality is that not everybody gets to feel that way. And it's interesting, when I was looking at some of the data and the statistics on kind of employment rates for specifically Bangladeshi and Pakistani women, and I was looking at some of the national statistics, and the data was showing that around 56% of Pakistani and Bangladeshi women have an inactivity rate, which means they're not in the labour force, they're not working. And historically, when people have seen that number of 56%, okay, half of Pakistani and Bangladeshi women aren't in the labour force, people have automatically assumed it's their culture, it's their family life, that's why they're not working. But has anyone stopped to think it's because the workplace has not been an inviting and inclusive place for them, that they feel safe and they feel heard? Rather than just making assumptions around some of that data, it's really understanding the experiences of those people and where they're coming from and what their feeling is. Maybe it's because when they have entered the workplace historically, they didn't feel invited, they didn't feel included. A lot of South Asian women were describing this kind of the code switching, the metamorphosis, they would say, of what they would have to do every day. If they'd leave the home, and just before they arrive at work every day, have to just kind of change into this new person when they enter the workplace, and when they go back home, change back out into somebody else. And that's exhausting. Like, imagine how tiring that is to do that every single day, day in, day out, and just you can't be yourself. So yeah, it really is that feeling that you know that environment is somewhere you belong.
Well said. I think there's interesting with the statistic you just mentioned there. I mean, there were some other stats which I failed to do in my introduction, which I think are probably relevant now to sort of to build upon amongst my many notes, if I can find them. So research from the Cabinet Office and of Race Disparity reports in 2014 that Black British women were as much as 13% more likely to experience common mental mental health disorders such as depression, anxiety, and obsessive compulsive disorder than their white counterparts, which I think is a really interesting statistic. I know it's quite dated, it's 2014, so it'd be interesting to see what it is now. Other research gathered for Mental Health First Aid's MEFA, Race Equity Impact Report, has proven that people of colour and black people experience poorer mental health outcomes than the rest of the population. It's reported, it's not a myth. And a report by City Mental Health Alliance found that nearly a third of black people, 29%, say their mental health has been negatively impacted by racism experienced specifically at work, which is really shocking. And last of the stats, because I think it's really powerful, Government and NHS Ethnicity Facts and Figures report found that in March 2021, black people were almost 5 times as likely as white people to be detained under the Mental Health Act, with 1 in 300 detentions of black people compared to less than 1 in 1,000 white British people, which are really quite sobering statistics. So, sorry if that's brought the mood down a bit. That was not my intention, but I think I was just trying to add a bit of context, if you like, to the process. So again, kind of thinking about from a workplace perspective, because we're trying to help everyone here to understand how they can do their bit. How as an employer can we help create a safe place to allow confidence in people to come forward and be open for support at work? Shall I start with you on that one, Catherine, seeing as you're head of HR? Oh, it doesn't have to be that order, but...
No, well, yeah, I mean, I've touched on it a little bit in my last answer, but I do definitely think that obviously we will try and create a space where it just naturally people feel welcome and open to be able to have those conversations. And the way that we do that is around, talking about the mental health first aider training, but also, we've got one in 10 people are mental health first aid trained, which is actually a good percentage of our employees compared to perhaps other organisations, but it's still actually quite a small amount of people, which is why we then decided to roll that out across all people who line manage. So we now have all of our managers doing mental health first aid training. And again, that just allows for those conversations to just happen naturally in, one-to-one settings where in the day-to-day. And I think it's doing things like that really weave it into the culture of the organisation, where it's not just it is a poster in the toilets, but it's also, it's more than that. And I think that it's actually what happens behind that is, every single person who has responsibility for looking after somebody's, pastoral care and well-being has been trained professionally. We do a half-day session with our lovely Lex, who actually now understand, right, when one of my employees comes to me and I can pick up on perhaps what the issues, I can pick up on the symptoms or the change in behaviour, or I can see that this person might be suffering or experiencing something that isn't, normal, and I can ask the right questions, I can know how to deal with that. And that kind of just allows that space to hopefully naturally feel safe without us having to say, we're now going to have an hour where we talk about something that's a bit, outside of work, and it's a safe space. So you sort of complement the Together We Stand aspect of it with ingraining it in, just what we do day to day. And I think that's hopefully creates a safe space.
Showing that you care as well. I think when you're approaching people, because a lot of the time there's loads of us out there suffering in silence, and we shouldn't be. Yeah, mental health, mental illness, this is all really normal, but we just don't talk about it. So it's that point when we think so many people are suffering, but they're not going for help. So it takes down for the people that are learning about it, as you're saying, the mental health first aiders or any sort of training, is to approach the people when they see something isn't right. We've got to try and pull it out of people to say, I can see, how are you today? Or you just don't seem yourself. Are you okay? Which opens up, which helps again with a safer space, because you feel like someone cares. If someone's coming to you and not just ignoring you, which is a lot of what we're doing. We can see someone's not right, but we're not doing anything about it. So it's just another avenue to go in and just try and help people and show, hey, we care. So again, back to that safe space.
Yeah. And I think it's, going back to the empathy, sympathy thing, is I think a lot of line managers, they might pick up on the signals of it, but not then know. And then we're going, oh, it's okay. And, that kind of could be perceived as patronising almost, will shut someone down. But if they're trained to be able to actually open up and ask the right questions and get somebody to, be able to share what they're going through, that just, that slight change, and it might just be just asking the right question, puts you on a completely different path to perhaps where you would have been before. So yeah, I think it's good to do. Good, thank you for doing it with us. Hopefully made a big change.
Yes, there is.
I think this is, so one of the things that we found out with our research from MEFA this year, which is in terms of lived experiences, young black women pretty much bottom of the pile in terms of lived experiences in media, followed closely by young Asian women. So this is, a brilliant topic, and we're actually we've had one seminar already, and we've got some other work that Nikki's working on it. But it is the question that comes back, particularly from senior men, whether it's white or, actually it's quite difficult to go to somebody and go, are you all right? Which is exactly what you should do, but I think what you said was great. If it's not part of your culture, if, no company's going to do it. But actually it's kind of like what needs to happen, and unfortunately building the culture takes so much time. Because I spoke to some white friends of mine who was senior, and they're like, there's no way I would go to a young black woman who works in the company. I've never spoken to her before, and I go, first of all I spoke to her and go, actually, are you all right? How are you doing? Because all of a sudden, as you said, it's kind of like, what's wrong? Why are you asking me that? Am I in trouble or something? And it's a really difficult kind of problem, especially in big businesses, to solve. I don't know the answer.
I think the key is the way that you approach someone to ask that question. Yeah, it's just that, sometimes if you kind of go, you okay? Some people might step back to kind of go, why are you asking me that? But then it is all right. So then the thing is, when we approach someone, we're seeing that they're not right. If we know them, we can think, well, they're not themselves, and we know the reasons why they're not themselves. So that's the way in to kind of go, is everything okay, or are you all right? You don't seem yourself. And if someone's like, well, what do you mean by that? We can lay out, well, this is you, or normally you're like this and you're not.
But that depends on the person actually knowing them. And I think
Yes,
that's the problem with our research. It basically picked this out, these two groups in particular. So all of a sudden you get management and leadership going, hey, we need to get involved and help these people. And it's coming from a good place, but actually it's almost impossible to do because you've got no relationship with that person. All you know is actually some people, young black and Asian women, because it's not all, actually not enjoying life here. So I think it's really tricksy, but I think you're right, we've got to find a way.
Sorry, go on.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say quickly, this is where I think we've all got a duty of care, though. This is where it comes down to. It's a case of someone high up might not know that person so well, but the person working next to them knows them very well. So it's up to everyone around to look at who you work with, your loved ones, anything like that, to go, it's them that approaches. Everyone has that duty of care.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what I was going to say. And just to add to that, I do feel some of the onus needs to be on leadership and from top down to do some of that work and to do some of that self-education of going away and learning about these people, learning about their experiences, learning about their lives, whether that is through books, whether that is through other forms of education, of doing some of that self-work to understand what these people's experiences are like. Because it's okay to say, I don't know much about them or don't know them personally, but that doesn't stop them from going away and doing some of that education about these communities and these marginalised groups, or whether it's women or whoever it is, actually doing some of that self-work. And so often when I've done a lot of these talks on ED&I, mental health, a number of these themes and topics, I go into rooms, I'm on panels, and so often the CEOs are never in the room, the partners are never in the room, the council, the board members are never in the room. It's everybody else there that's willing to listen. The people that we need to be there to listen are often not there. So the onus is on top down, on leadership to really do some of that work.
And I guess even if it's just by starting, just start having the conversation. You might get it wrong.
Yeah, and that's
okay. People think you're genuine.
Yeah.
You'll get there in the end.
Yeah, the
and
intention.
I think leadership has to take the first step.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's something very honest about our original interactions, Naren, when you were like, we don't mind if you get your language wrong. We'd rather we talk about it. And I think sometimes people get in a bit of a pickle because they think they might say the wrong thing. But actually starting the conversation is the point, right? And it's the training. And I think the point you just made there, just about educating yourself.
Yeah.
That's why wouldn't you want to educate yourself about something? It shows a real lack of desire to have empathy or to understand those groups. So I think there's quite a lot in this that probably we need to work on. And it'd be interesting, and I know this isn't part of the kind of broader conversation, but as a teacher, obviously you have incredible access to a younger generation that is kind of still faced with some of the things we're talking about and very much in certain communities we've just discussed. How do you feel that is going compared to when you were being brought up, for example? Do you feel there's improvement, or is there things you're able to help to do when you're seeing things in your classroom or in the broader school?
Yeah, in the school environment. So specifically with the demographic I work with, so secondary school students and also university students, unfortunately, as we all know, with the pandemic and since 2020, young people are in a crisis point right now. They're in a very difficult place right now in terms of their mental health, in terms of anxiety, the increase of depression, increase of loneliness and isolation. A lot of young people are suffering. And it is up to us adults in their lives, whether it's educators, whether it's their families, to recognise what's going on and making sure they're getting the support that they need. But sadly, the lack of funding, the lack of resources in schools means a lot of these kids aren't getting the help that they need. So again, trying to think of creative ways to help young people, whether it's bringing creative arts into the classroom, whether it's teachers really looking out for some of the signals and the signs of knowing when something's not right with one of their students, and having that awareness and again the empathy to support them through it. So yeah, specifically for young people, I think they're going through a really, really difficult time, and we all, I'm sure, have young people in our lives. So just making sure we're checking in on them and being there for them and being empathetic to their needs. Because there's a lot of things that demographic are going through that perhaps we didn't. Things like living in a digital age, living on social media, living with a device in your hand all the time that's telling you that your life should look like this and you should feel like this. A lot of us didn't have to grow up with that, so I can only imagine how difficult that can be for them as well. So being empathetic of that for young people.
Yeah. Well said. So
Sorry, can I
Karen.
just add? So a key word that's been coming up throughout is communication. Yeah. And I think in a work environment, to your point, Naren, yes, you can't have C-suite coming down to sort of a new starter and saying, you don't look great today, how are things? But what we all have is a manager, right? And part of that manager's role is to understand the individuals in their team, right? Know what makes them tick as an individual so you know how to motivate them, but also get the best out of them. So then if you're in conversation with them, you start to learn things about them. So you will know when they're perhaps being a bit quiet or whatever is happening for them. But with enough conversation, you'll be able to see that. But then you create that safe space where they can open up to you. And even to the point they may come to you and say, look, this is going on for me right now. I need some support, or whatever it is that they may need, which means that you can actually have that open dialogue. So it's not necessarily, the onus is on both parties, but I think the bigger onus is on the manager to create that space and to be able to have those conversations on a regular basis. So if you know someone well, as you say, you can see a trigger, like with a friend, you can go, oh, what's going on? You're not yourself today, you're a bit quiet, is everything okay, kind of thing. Because So I think it's really important that if you manage a team, to get to know them as individuals. No one or heritage, etc., is a monolith, right? So just because you have another black female friend over here, the one in your team, they're not the same person, right? And we're not the stereotypes. So please see beyond the perceptions and the stereotypes, and then get to know us all as individuals. Yeah. And then we can have those dialogues, then we can start creating those safe spaces.
I think,
It's-
go on,
yeah.
Lex, you were going to say.
I was just literally, I was just reminding me, my friend said to me the other day, when you've met one black person, you've only ever met one black person.
Yeah.
And I'm like, it's so true, isn't it? Again, it's like, that's one person. You can't like, oh, you're all the same there. No, not at all.
But
Yeah.
they often think we're the same. And the questions that we get, like, do you know someone who's in prison? Why do you think I know someone who's in
is that a
prison?
question? No.
Oh, seriously, like,
Bloody hell.
but it's all the stereotypes, and they're asking to confirm them, and then they're disappointed when you're not any of those things. You are. I'm me.
Yeah.
I'm Karen. This is who I am. Believe me when I tell you and I show you. This is who I am. Let's start from there.
Yeah, so interesting. I was at an IPA talk last week actually, and it was about empowering women. But there was a lady who was talking on a panel, and she had set up her own kind of content marketing agency, and she came from a South Asian heritage as well. And she was and they specialised in reaching that particular community. And one of her clients had come to her, and they were a sort of breast cancer awareness charity, and they said, we really want to be able to reach, this group of women who aren't naturally coming forward with those problems, and we can see that there's a gap in the market there for us to really kind of, educate them and get them to check their breasts. And it's quite a taboo subject for a lot of people, and probably feel a bit kind of uncomfortable talking about it, but breast cancer awareness is something that is widely talked about in advertising all the time. So it shouldn't be something that anyone's embarrassed about. But when they went to the client had gone to the agency and said, we assume that we need to kind of change our language a bit and be a bit more, gentle around talking about breasts, like, is that the right word to use? And they'd made a stereotype in their mind about how they needed to communicate with the community based on the stereotype that, they cover up and, they don't talk about sex or boobs. And it was so interesting because the woman was like, no, we love sex. Like, we talk about our tits all the time. And it was just like, this is amazing. I knew I'd say something embarrassing, but
Love it.
but it totally broke the mold, and it was so refreshing because the client, they were like, just do what you do, like just talk about breast cancer and how you check your breasts, and don't worry about the gender stereotypes because that's not who we are. And it was just like, yeah, nailed it.
Yeah, talk to the community
Yeah.
themselves,
Yeah.
hear it from them rather than assuming.
Exactly. And I
Yeah.
mean, the client, bless him, I think was feeling quite sort of embarrassed afterwards. To
Yeah.
sort of think, God, I can't even believe that I had that vision in my mind of how this campaign should look. And luckily saved himself by speaking to somebody he knew.
Yeah.
But yeah, really interesting.
Amazing. Well, look, I'm conscious we actually are 5 minutes over our designated time slot, but I'm going to be guided by the group in terms of whether we're able to speak for a few more minutes, and obviously by our panel to see whether they're able to take a few more questions or the like. But I do have more questions, but I wanted to open up to the group to see if there are any other questions that you might want to ask this esteemed panel. Yogi. Yeah.
Microaggressions. So I'm guilty of doing them myself, but I've certainly experienced them. When you tell someone, oh, my name's Yogi Patel, and they're like, oh, I've got loads of friends who are Patels. Or they turn around to you and they say, oh, your English is really good. And you're like, well, thanks, so's yours, But I had somebody not long ago say, oh, where are you from? And I'm like, well, I was born at Westminster Hospital. No, but where are you really from? Well, my mum's from Uganda, my dad's from Kenya. Yeah, but before that, oh, well, my grand's from Gujarat in India. Ha, I knew it, And it's like, why do I have to go that far back to identify myself? But how do you put that in check? How do you challenge people? Because I always feel like I can't challenge them because I'll put them on edge and I'll shut down a conversation where they could open up and I could open up. Do you be snarky? Do you just laugh it off? Do you actually say, what did you mean by that? I don't know what the answer is in a social context.
I would suggest all of the above, right? But hear me out. Purely because it's not we can't fight every single microaggression, right? So we we are selective about the ones that we might laugh them off, because it might depend on the environment, right? We might not be somewhere where we feel safe to challenge someone, so we may laugh it off. We may experience flight, freeze. Thank you. Audience participation there, thank you. We might experience that kind of leaves us frozen, so we don't respond and we just hope the conversation moves on. And sometimes, if it's aggressive to us, we may choose aggression back. For me, a phrase that I often use is to kind of disarm in a way and enable them to enter into a conversation, if that's what they'd like to do. It's like, I'm curious, why did you ask that? It's not what I really want to say, but that's what comes out, right? So it means if they're open to a conversation, it's hopefully a conversation opener. And also, more importantly, if you're open in that moment, as the person receiving the microaggression, to have that conversation as well. And talking about mental health and microaggressions, I personally don't believe that they're micro. They're actually macro, right? Because you get so many of them. They're not small things, they're big things. And I like to visualize, and whenever I hear the word microaggression, I think of horror movies, right? And I think if every microaggression an individual received was like a paper cut somewhere on their body, but visible and doesn't heal, I'd be looking really scary right now, yeah? So yes, and thank you for that question. That obviously needed to come out.
Yeah.
You've used the word paper cuts, which is exactly what I've used in the book as well. So describing microaggressions as paper cuts, nothing micro about microaggressions. And I think the harm in not doing anything about it when you receive them, whether that's saying something in the moment, whether that's flagging up later on, whether that's dealing with it with sarcasm, with humor, through education, the harm of not doing anything is they will think it's okay to do again to somebody else. And that's why we do need to flag it up in some way, shape or form through those different mechanisms so that they don't continue that behavior, because it will happen then to somebody else. And then also doing the healing you might need to do personally after that situation as well. It's great that you might try to deal with it with that person and have that conversation and go through that education, but then you need to go away and then do some healing from it as well, and give yourself some softness after those moments, because if those paper cuts don't heal, you're going to be covered in them and you're going to be in a lot of pain. So take that time to do that self-healing as well.
Yeah, because there is a temptation to suppress, right? Because if something happens often enough, it becomes normal, right? And if we imagine ourselves as vessels, which we are, being filled with drips of water, if we don't take care of ourselves through self-care, mental health, well-being, etc., it's eventually going to overflow because it can't hold anymore. And I think culturally, we suppress it, right? You've got the strong black woman trope, which is not helpful at all to the individuals or to the culture. So you're right. It's dealing with it so it doesn't get pushed down, and then there's no more room, and it's overflowing, because that's harder to come back from.
Most definitely, because if you think about it, the human body, it's not designed to repress anything. Yeah, but we're very good at doing it because we think we can. But eventually it's going to come out at some point, and that's, whether it's stress, anxiety, depression, all those sorts of things. So, self-care is key when these things are happening.
Well, I don't think that you should have to suppress it. You shouldn't experience it in the first place. And I think actually calling it out helps educate those, because I think some of the examples you gave there, Yogi, I can imagine that the people that have said that haven't meant that in a malicious way. It's been naivety, and they've said that because they're probably just trying to make conversation, or they're a bit awkward about it, and they've said the wrong thing. It happens to women all the time, and I think for any minority group, microaggressions sometimes come across because the person's nervous about saying the right thing, or they want to create what they perceive as an interesting conversation, but actually you find that quite offensive. And so by addressing that will actually really help to make everybody understand what's appropriate and what isn't. And then hopefully, the world will be a better place and you won't have to repress it because it won't happen.
Excellent question, Yogi. Any others? Yes, please ask away.
When I came to this country, a few years ago, I went for a job interview, because where I came from, we're not allowed to look at elders or those in authority straight in the eyes. So I did a job interview. They told me that I was the best candidate, but that they couldn't take me because I had something to hide. Because I couldn't look them in the eye. I was looking down. So they said I was very shifty. So that's why. So I think they were not culturally aware. So
That's a really good point, and probably something.
so that's the HR.
Yeah. What does the group think about that? Because that's incredibly relevant, isn't it? And you can think
Yeah.
about all the awareness of different cultures and.
And I think it comes back to the education points again as well, because that, to somebody who's not familiar with your culture and the nuances around that, wouldn't pick up on that. So you've got to just continually educate yourself and learn about the different cultures and the relevance of them, so that you can be as open-minded and mindful of those things as possible, and actually think, 'cause there's a reason why that person's not making eye contact with me. It could be because of that, it could be because they're suffering from nerves, anxiety, lack of confidence. There's many reasons why. It's probably not because they don't want to look at you. There's going to be another reason. But it's understanding, thinking about that mindfully and thinking, okay, I'm not going to discredit that person because of something that, a behaviour that they're demonstrating, because there's going to be something behind it. And you might not, an interview is probably not the right kind of forum to ask that question, but just park it, and that will probably come out in time if it needs to. But I wouldn't discriminate against somebody because of it, I think, is my advice.
Again, that's where you think the stigma and discrimination go back to that frame of reference. To me, like, the first thing is I'm like thinking, well, what's that person thinking that's interviewing you to think that you're shady? So they clearly think from their side, people who don't look at you are shady. That's their frame of reference, isn't it? So everyone they're going to meet that doesn't look at them in the eye, they're shady. So that comes from that person, nothing to do with you. But then that's, like, they're brave enough to challenge when someone says something like that to you. It means you're shady. Like, well, whose opinion's that? Or where does that come from for you to believe that? It's, but it's sad that happens. Mm-hmm.
Do you think they took on board your feedback when you gave that feedback back to the organisation that
No, I
you
was
spoke to?
new in the country, so I couldn't say anything. I didn't even think I thought they were right. So I learned some of their eyes.
And is that something that's now you're more comfortable doing, or do you still, is that from...
No, I'm okay, but then I thought, I made a mistake, so I have to learn to decide. So I now went to learn how to do job interviews. So they said, look somebody in the eye.
I think that's another topic that is something
definitely,
that everyone probably has views upon, about this kind of belief that suddenly everyone just understands how to do a job interview. There is, it's such a science in itself and there's so many complexities to it, and the understanding that particularly youngsters from different environments that might not have the access to be given guidance around what supposedly good looks like in an interview in the kind of perceived expectation of corporate world is incredible. It puts people at an immediate disadvantage. And there's a whole bunch of work that needs to be done on that affects all communities. That is just something that I think we should have another session about, to be quite frank. We've all got strong opinions on it. But look, I'm conscious of time, and I know it's 6:30, and I know some people probably have to leave. I know some people are probably desperate to get to the bar over there. But is there anything else anyone would like to raise before we begin to wrap this up and say, oh yes, please. So who do we go first? You can both ask your questions.
Thank you. Just you raised the point about talks like this and the CEO and the board never being there. From my experience, it's normally because they don't have diverse lives themselves, therefore they don't feel a need to be involved in the conversation. So how do we get those that aren't there to actually believe, firstly, they may need to diversify their own lives, but secondly, that they need to also be in these rooms, listening to these conversations, because it's all well and good us sitting here and having these conversations over and over again. But as you said, you have to lead from the top down. You can't lead from the bottom up. So how do we get them in the rooms to listen to this?
That's a great question.
I feel like it's a question for Marcus because he's the one that.
Well, I'm afraid I'm probably not. It's not fair because I have a heritage. My stepmother is of Kenyan descent. I have a brother who is of mixed race. So therefore, I probably have more empathy than most other CEOs, which is why the reason we believe so fundamentally in educating ourselves in this area. I'm very privileged to be educated, having first-hand access, but I appreciate that came to me a bit later on. You know, I was in my younger years, I was blissfully unaware, but in my late teenage years, I was able to become more aware. And I think the whole point here is awareness, right, and education. And it's really hard because I have friends from a whole bunch of different backgrounds, from my school, through university, through work, and like everyone else, we all hear a number of different things that kind of inform opinion or push people in a certain direction to think in a certain way. And the thing that I'm lucky enough to be brought up in a way is just to have an open mindset. And so if you have an open mindset and you're willing to learn, fundamentally, that gives you an advantage, I think. And that then ties to the empathy point, which is if you put yourself in someone else's shoes, fundamentally, you're always going to have a good starting point, because whether you agree or not, and that's also okay. I think it's also okay to say that it doesn't matter what background someone's from, you can fundamentally disagree with what they say. That doesn't make you biased in any way, it just means you have a different viewpoint on it. It's talking. And so, you know, I was not really hoping to talk during this session because I think we've got such a brilliant panel, but that's my perspective on things. And I think everyone's got a story, right? And I try not to, it's really important that we don't judge those people who haven't had that first-hand experience because they just haven't had that experience. It doesn't mean they're necessarily bad. And I think, I'm not trying to speak on behalf of all CEOs, but you know, there's a lot of things you're trying to manage. And I think when you're trying to run a business during complex times, like it has been incredibly challenging 4 or 5 years for everyone. I anticipate, unfortunately, more challenging years ahead with what we're going through recession. And that means that topics like we're discussing today sometimes fall down the agenda. They do, I'm being honest. A lot of organisations will go, right, we're not going to cover that anymore because we've got to focus on keeping the business afloat, and that is our number one priority. But my promise to you as this group is that we will always try and make sure that it does stay as a really important part of everything we're talking about. But probably slightly unfair question because I've got a little bit of experience in that space.
I think that's a tough one as well to answer.
It's a really tough one to answer. Yeah.
But I appreciate your honesty in saying that with everything happening, it gets pushed down the agenda. So I appreciate that honesty.
I'd like to say that's not happening here, but I think the reality is the point is when you're managing really, really complex a business during really complex times, the pressures come from so many different areas. You've just got to try and play a straight bat using cricket. So I love cricket. It is because you've just got to try and be fair and be clear in your communication, and just to really, really make sure that everyone understands where you're coming from. But that's what these sessions are for, right?
But they also have a role to play in creating a culture of safe space because they need to be seen in those spaces also. So it's getting that balance.
Yeah, I think to the annoyance of most of the team, I'm quite a visible person in the organisation, and that's good and bad, I think, probably in some respects, because I was interested when they were saying, would you go and speak to that person? I naturally would, no matter what level, within entry level all the way through, but I appreciate that's not something that's comfortable to everyone. There was another, sorry.
So just to add to it, I guess I hate bringing it down to numbers and bringing it down to profit and bringing it down to the business and economic side of it, but showing those leaders and showing the CEOs how beneficial it is to the company and to the business if people are happy, if people want to stay, if talent's being retained. And that shouldn't be the reason they get involved. That's not what I'm saying, but it's one of the factors that can pull them in. So I guess historically that's been one of the ways that we've tried to engage kind of leadership, by showing them that data and showing them the statistics to say, look, if your workplace has created a culture that is like this, it's going to make more money. So not that that should be the reason, but yeah.
Really great question. I was going to ask something very similar, actually, so I've just thought of another one in the meantime. But just, quick, I just wanted to ask what your opinion is on employee resource groups, maybe particularly Catherine, because you're head of HR. I know I belonged to a group from my previous agency, which was quite large, and we had a group for staff of colour. And somebody said to me, how is this helpful within the working environment? Because you guys are just isolating yourself more by having those type of groups. I just wondered what your opinion is on that.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and it's something that I've grappled with quite a lot here at Media Lab. And if just in case anyone isn't sure what an ERG is, it's a group where a minority group will come together. So you might have a women's network or a black network who then get together and show support to each other. And I think there's value in having it, but I think also creating a culture where it's not just then everyone coming together and blocking everyone out. So it's a really hard one, because I think it has to come from the individuals. And there's been instances where we've tried to say, right, we need to create some ERGs and put people in boxes and get them to go and talk about stuff and feel supported by each other. But that can't come from me, and it can't come from the leadership, I don't think, really. The support to do it should be there. And for example, Susie's initiated a women's network. She's one of our board members, to support everybody to come together who are female, so that we can talk about experiences, support each other if we feel we want to, share ideas, inspire each other, educate each other, whatever it is that you want to do in that time. But it's down to the individuals to really make it happen, I think. And me telling you've got to get together and rally together and support each other isn't really it's not going to help. I think it has to happen from within, and naturally it does. You see it kind of naturally happening where people do gravitate toward each other and they support each other. And I think if you have that and provide the support if it happens naturally, and then you create other environments where, like Together We Stand, is so diverse in the types of topics that we talk about. It's everything from race to gender to age to mental health. You like to hope that you're sort of hopefully covering every angle in terms of diversity, because you might have people who are female but also they're gay and also they're black, and so having a forum where you could talk about all of those different facets of somebody's individual personality and heritage is I think just as beneficial as having a close-knit support network as well. So a bit of both.
Does anyone else want to add to that, or does that answered your question? Okay.
Thank you for asking.
Yeah, excellent question. Any more before we begin to wrap this up and move on to the networking, drinking bit? Excellent. Oh, go on, Susie. Surprise, surprise.
I don't think the code shifting thing really interests me, because I think I would imagine lots of people do that at work, and I imagine a white middle class man probably has to do it less than anyone else has to do it within the workplace. But I can imagine, I'm not a mum, but I imagine a mum coming back to work, it sort of does put on that face at the door, go in, and it feels like they've got to switch off some of their kind of mum persona on that. So I just wondered if that's something that you just feel lots of people are doing, but to varying degrees. And actually, you talked before about, the black gay woman, the intersectionality of it means that you are more like you're at the extreme end of code shifting when you go in the door. I'm really on the light touch end of it, because I'm probably quite going in and doing what I might do anyway. And you're probably the same, completely the same at work as you are outside of work, possibly. So
That's a very rambling thing that isn't even a question, but it was just, it just made me think about it a lot as we were going through. So is code shifting a broad challenge for lots of people?
It definitely resonates with me. I think so, and yeah. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it will impact everybody at some varying degree, no matter who you are. Even if you are a white male cis man, maybe there are still things that you're having to change and hide. Who knows? So I think it does impact people, no matter who you are. But depending on some of that intersectionality of who you are, brings a bit more of those layers of difficulty and kind of it's a spectrum, I think.
I think you can almost ask everyone in the room, put your hand up if that's ever been you. Find out that way to kind of go, right, let's see how many of us have done that. Yeah, that's it. It's like, yeah.
For me, I think a lot of it depends on if you're in a workplace that you're quite happy. So I've found I've had to do it a lot more in places that there've been other challenges that are nothing to do with my gender necessarily, but I've had to kind of paste the face on as you go in, but somewhere where you are more comfortable in, where it does feel like more of a safe space, you don't have to do it as much. So let's do.
We sometimes go back to when we think years ago when people used to say, "Oh, work's work, home's home." You know, park your personal stuff at the door when you walk into work, and that's kind of that persona there, isn't it? I have to be someone else. I can't bring any of me into here because this is how I need to be here. And that's all changed now. You can't, like, just think mentally. You can't, well, right, okay, I'll just park my brain here, and then that's it. Just walk in and help you out here. Yeah.
And do you think lockdown helped with that or hindered it? Because we saw into people's lives a lot more, didn't we, just naturally by being on Zoom forever or Teams forever.
Yeah. I think it's a mixture. I think it's helped in some way and hindered in others as, definitely.
Yeah.
Sorry, I feel like
No.
I think, actually, let's swap. Well, look, I think we're gonna draw it to a close there, if that's okay, unless there's any other particularly burning questions. Right. I'm just gonna finish by sending a very heartfelt thank you to our amazing panel. So I think if we could all a round of applause for Jeffrey, Lex, Catherine and Karen.